Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the CIH Podcast. My name is Matthew Scott. I work in the Policy and External Affairs team at CIH, and today I'm joined by three fantastic guests for a conversation about the professional standards and how important they are for housing. So in no particular order, I'm joined today by Bjorn, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Astor Group. I'm joined by Michael Guest, who is the Director of Michael Guest Associates Limited. And I'm also joined by Trish Harrington-Dicks, the Vice Chair and I understand incoming Chair of CIH's Professional Standards Committee and also Service Improvement Manager at ABRI. Now, as I said, this discussion today is going to be focused on the professional standards, and it's a very important time for the standards within housing with the forthcoming introduction of the Conduct and Competency Standard. And our three guests today are going to talk about what the standards mean to them, how they put them into practice in their own organisations, and hopefully also dispense some advice about what you, our listeners, can be doing and should be doing in regards to professionalism and getting ready for the upcoming standards. So, welcome to all of our guests. We're going to go straight in with the first question. And Michael, I'm going to come to you first if it's okay. So the first question is just, what are the current challenges facing the housing sector? What needs to be improved? And how do you feel that the professional standards in CIH support in tackling these?
I think for the challenge, I would inevitably choose funding shortfalls. First of all, despite the ambitions of the can we still call it a new government now after a year or so? Anyway, the new government and its increase on the social and affordable programme, obviously it still falls quite short of the ambitions that they have and we all have for numbers in affordable and social houses. So there's a whole long list, isn't there? But the thing I would pick would be funding shortfalls in terms of the challenges, one of the many challenges facing the sector. The sector's been very innovative over the years in finding alternatives to straightforward public subsidy. And I think perhaps one of the things that we need to move on to continue doing is to find other alternative methods of raising alternative funding in order to invest in housing, which I know is going on as well. But anyway, to answer your question, funding shortfalls, number one.
Okay. Trish, do you want to come in next on that question?
So I wanted to start with kind of trust, accountability and resident voice, because I see the sector facing challenges in restoring trust and delivering consistent tenant-focused services. And the professional standards really help embed those behaviours and rebuild credibility. We're also seeing workforce shortages and increasing complexity in our residents' needs. And the professional standards offer really a clear benchmark for what good practice looks like and will really help housing professionals and organisations, I believe, focus their development efforts. I also see that consistency in culture is something else, and standards provide a real shared foundation for values, behaviours, and those service expectations, which should create a more unified and professional culture across the sector. And I mean, I see the professional standards really providing that roadmap to kind of help navigate through a really complex and fast changing environment. And whatever you're facing as a housing professional, whether you are just starting out or maybe a senior manager, I feel the professional standards provide that strong framework for the many decisions you may have to make, and they might be conscious or subconscious. But this is where the elements that really relate to values and behaving ethically with respect come into play.
Absolutely. It's a great sort of set of principles for how the standards sort of should be operating and how they should be improving behaviours across the board in the sector. Bjorn, what do you think?
And I can't disagree in any way with what Michael and Tricia just said, but I think the one thing that I would highlight is that the landscape for our colleagues, particularly in frontline housing services, has probably never been more challenging and complex. You know, I'm a housing professional of more than 30 years now, and I would say it's the most challenging environment I've seen for our frontline colleagues ever. Part of that, as Tricia says, I think that we're seeing an increasingly vulnerable cohort of people being allocated our homes, and what was generally swathes of general needs housing has now got a multiplicity of challenges in it. I'd also highlight increasing expectations, both from our customers, which is to be welcomed, but also from our regulators, from our politicians, and a host of others as well. All of that, I think, is good. We should be committed to driving up standards, but it also stretches our professionalism when there is mission creep in what we're trying to achieve. And never has it been more important, I think, that we have shared values as a housing sector. Now, Asda has just over 2,100 colleagues, and we have adopted a CIH-based professional standards for all of us, no matter what job role we have or what part we play in the organisation, because as Trish says, really, it's about shared values and shared approaches, and our professionalism as a sector has never been more important than it is today.
Great, Bjorn. You've mentioned there, of course, CIH's professional standards framework that we've developed and that we encourage the whole sector to adopt as that foundation for the shared values that you've been talking about. I think, can we dig a little bit deeper into how those standards are being used across the sector and what we all feel the benefits of doing that are? I know we've touched a little bit on it already in terms of giving us that sort of bedrock that everybody can be working to. But Michael, perhaps I can come to you first again. You know, what do you feel are the benefits to using these standards, and how do you see these standards being applied across the sector?
Yes, I think it's on different levels, which is partly been touched on already, but just to build on that, I can see that the standards are used quite regularly within housing organisations on an organisational wide basis. So, for example, maybe to do with training and development plans, to do with moves towards moving the organisational cultures on in particular organisations to be more consistent with these standards. So, in other words, they get integrated into appraisal systems and become consistent across the organisation, both consistent for that organisation and consistent with the standards themselves as well. Sometimes you see the word embedded being attached to this sort of approach here. They're embedded in the way in which organisations conduct themselves, which then flows through in terms of their use to individuals, which has already been touched on here, no matter who, from the chief executive right the way through to the frontline staff, because the organisation-wide then feeds into, say, people's individual appraisals or into plans for training and qualifications and so forth. And then the next step being to their own CPD, so the responsibility on individuals within the organisation to take them into account for their continuing professional development that they plan themselves for each other, which hopefully would involve using the assessment tool on the CIH's website, which obviously is available to anybody, and using the feedback that comes through from the use of that in terms of the multiple choice questions on there as well. So really, in my experience, that's what I'm seeing and experiencing, different levels from corporate through to planning the organisation through to individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that I say both to our members and to partners sometimes as well, is that it doesn't matter that whether you're a chief executive or you're coming through the GEM program, whether you're working in sustainability or allocations, whatever role that you might be in within housing, it provides you with a sort of framework to understand where you are, but also, as you say, Michael, how you need to improve, what you might want to do next in terms of CPD, any of the training courses that you might want to go on. So I think that adaptability of it is really, really important for any housing professional, whatever you might be doing. Trish, particularly from ABWI's point of view, how have you looked to sort of use these standards and embed these across the organisation, to use Michael's term, and what are the benefits that you're seeing of doing so?
So just building on what Michael was saying there, I really agree. professionalism isn't just for managers, it's for everyone in housing. And although the Competence and Conduct Standard is kind of requesting those qualifications for senior managers and executives, everyone needs to have that training, support and guidance and knowledge, whatever stage of their career. So I absolutely agree with that. And if we think about what we've been doing at ABRI, we see the professional standards really being the closest thing we have to a competency framework. And it's really consistent and accessible to all organisations. And here at ABRI, it's been integrated within our organisational framework. So we're using it within our personal development plans, templates as an example. We've also aligned it to our values and behaviours. And we've introduced things as well, like an ABRI CIH club, where colleagues can come together. We're a community of housing professionals that look at things that are happening in the sector, learn about new things, share good practice together, and that's really taken off in the business and something that I would encourage other housing associations to have. Michael mentioned as well, in terms of kind of benefits around it for individual use, is the CIH Professional Standards Self-Assessment really enables housing professionals to identify areas of strength, pinpoint areas for development, and also build in that reflective practice and structured personal development plans. I also see the benefits really being about empowering staff to take ownership of their own learning, promoting professionalism at every level in the business, building pride and confidence in the sector and that shared purpose. And thinking as a manager as well. Bjorn talked earlier about how complex it is in housing at the moment. And as a manager, this is a really good tool to deploy to your teams to support them with their learning and development. It also raises the status of careers in housing, which makes it more attractive. And I feel as well, having the standards, it really says to our residents, have confidence and trust in us and what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really interesting, Trish, that you mentioned the CIH clubs, and that we as a policy team are frequently now coming along to those clubs, aren't we? And giving updates on policy, talking about some of the work that we're doing, not just in the policy space, but also in the practice space, you know, sharing examples of what we're hearing from other organisations in terms of how they might be doing, you know, something to do with sustainability or something to do with elsewhere. So I think they're a really great vehicle for kind of driving professionalism through an organisation, and we certainly want to see more of those clubs making requests of us as a team to come along and chat about policy. Bjorn, I guess the same question to you, you know, thinking about PASTA and what you're doing, you know, how are you starting to use the standards, and what are you seeing as the benefits of kind of putting them into place across the organisation?
Matthew, I think there's again an awful lot I'd agree with in terms of what Michael and Tricia just said. From Asta's perspective, it's interesting that the word culture has been used, and I think that is really, really important as part of all of this, and where the professional standards really support healthy cultural development. So in fact, in the way in which we have done it, we have something called the Asta Way, which is our cultural manual, if you like, about how we want to behave with each other, with our customers and so on. And the professional standards are actually embedded in that. So it's kind of like meshed in with the way in which we as an organisation behave. And I think that's really important. The other element I would highlight, because there is a wealth of information on the CIH website, which, you know, some of it, most of it actually is publicly available, some of it more available to members. Great stuff there, because I was saying earlier on about the complexity of our challenges now. They're also infinitely interesting. And one of the things that's so exciting about working in housing is that we constantly face what I would describe as these kind of like moral hazards, some really difficult situations where there's not a binary yes or no, a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do. It's very blurred. And there, the ethical decision-making framework and some of the work that we do around ethics, I think, is really interesting and very important. And there's a lot there about making ethical decisions. And so for me, I think those are some of the decisions that are the most frightening. You know, we don't know what the right answer is, but what we can do is think through the right questions and arriving at the answer. And that, I think, is really important in good quality business ethics. And a lot of what we're talking about is also about ethics as well as about culture. So I think the use of our professional standards, the ethical decision-making framework to guide us when we're faced with really knotty challenges that involve the quality of people's lives, I think is a fantastic tool to have. So I'd very much say part of this for me is that we should see this as a tool that assists us and helps us to be better at what we do. You can call it more professional, that's the term we generally use, but really it's being about better at what we do, better people for our customers, better people for our colleagues. And I therefore think it's a tool about personal development. It's very much enmeshed with continuing professional development. And I think what we've got there is a set of tools which are hugely useful. They're not there as a set of rules, they're not there as a set of constraints, policies or procedures. They're there to help us to be better at what we do.
I think that's fascinating because we've had a huge focus in the sector now for a number of years on this topic of improving culture and driving culture change across organisations. And that has to come from the top, but it also has to filter right down through all of the different teams, all of the different directorates that we might have. And it can sometimes feel overwhelming to do that. It can sometimes feel like culture is this kind of fuzzy thing that exists up here, and we sort of look at it and go, well, how do we really change that? And it's really interesting to hear that you've been embedding some of those really practical tools that CIH has into your process of doing that. So it almost gives you a roadmap of, okay, if we really want to improve our culture and if we want to make those services better for our residents through doing that, here's the practical way we can do it. I think that's fascinating and really sort of interested to hear about that. Of course, all of this, we've been doing this in the sector now for a number of years, as I've said. We've now had the new government, although I agree, Michael, I'm not sure we can call them new anymore, confirm that they're going to go ahead with introducing the Competency and Conduct Standard, which has been in development now for a number of years. This standard is about a lot of things for CIH. It is about, of course, the qualification, but as I think you've all covered so far, for us at CIH, it's really about embedding those cultures, those values and those behaviours across all of our organisations and across our housing system as a whole. So I think that the question that I want to dig a little bit more into is, how can organisations' kind of engagement with and use of the professional standards that CIH has sort of support and help prepare organisations for what is coming through the Competency and Conduct Standard? How can kind of getting a grip of these standards that we have right now put you in the best possible place to be complying, not just with the qualification bit of the C&C standard, but that broader kind of framework of professionalism that comes with it? Michael, I'll come to you again. Do you want to kick us off on that one?
Okay, yeah, so I thought it was interesting what you said about the qualifications aspect of it, because undeniably, ever since it was first mooted that there would be a competence and conduct standard, the headline, I think I'll use that expression, the headline has always been this issue of qualifications and all the implications, all the complications around that as well. And obviously that's extremely important, not denying that. But there's the rest as well, as I think you were really intimating at as well. So how the professional standards can support the competence and conduct standard, I think first and foremost, first thing to mention is that they align. The work undertaken by ourselves as the professionals, aligns with what the officially is being looked for. I was hesitating to use the word officially, but you know what I mean. In terms of the formality of the standard, regulatorily, not an easy word to say, in terms of the standard. So there's the alignment factor as well. And the CIH standards, professional standards, provide a detailed framework that aligns with the competence and conduct standard to guide us all towards what we should be aiming for and seeking. We're defining behaviours, values, and ethics as well. All those things which can be very difficult to pin down. I was quite struck with what Bjorn just said around the ethical question as well, which I think sort of connects in at this point here. I often find myself using the expression professional judgment when I'm working with clients around, well, everything really. And what Bjorn said is absolutely true. There is no black and white. There is no clear path. And sometimes a decision on one particular situation is a different decision next time around, and it's all down to professional judgment. And I think, just building on what Bjorn said there about ethics, looking at the standard, what the professional standard says about ethics, it's a lot of it. The questions we have to ask ourselves about the impact of the decisions. If I decide this way, how's it going to affect, well, first and foremost, the person, the customer, the resident? How's it going to impact on them? And if it's adversely, then we need to think again. But also that there's the impact on colleagues, there's the impact on the organisation generally, there's the impact on people with whom we collaborate in terms of other agencies and so on. So obviously there are follow-on questions to ask around which way should we go on this. But I think the ethics standard in particular helps us towards that. I think it also supports the competence and the conduct standard by encouraging continuous learning. We've talked about senior people and levels 3 and 4 qualifications being required, but there's everybody else in the sector as well. Some going back to a previous question, or a previous answer to a previous question about encouraging continuous learning and self-reflection as well. Sometimes we often talk about as well. It's that's part of it, isn't it? That we undertake critical self-reflection of ourselves and hopefully learn from that and share that with other people as well, and encourage colleagues and so on to join in with that reflection as well. Qualifications we talked about, and whether in due course after the sort of equivalent of head of service, equivalent of executive director type approach, we'll see an extension of that, hopefully voluntarily. I mean, I think I hear from the Housing Academy part of the CIH that there is a lot of take up by others who are not necessarily at those senior levels, just generally speaking as well. I think I'd also say, although obviously the Competency and Conduct Standard, we're talking about England, I hope it would also influence other parts of the UK and beyond as well that CIH is involved in, as a matter of good practice. It's not just because the regulator has setting the standard in one part of the UK. I would hope it would spread as well. So all that's under qualification pathways, really, about people gaining the technical knowledge and practical skills as well. It's aligns and supports the regulatory standard with the self-assessment tools for development as well. A lot of work CIH has done there to help, including, and Bjorn picked up on this point as well, about culture. It's not all about individual skills and knowledge and behaviours and so on. It's about the whole, what it all adds up to, the whole culture of the organisation as well, and the general professionalisation of the sector as a whole. And then I suppose the final part about how it supports the coming of the regulatory standard, the Competence and Conduct Standard, is about transition support as well. It doesn't all happen overnight. CIH is very much involved in offering support on going from where we are now to where we need to be over the next, say, 3-year period, which I think is a tremendous resource for the sector really, one, should be aware of, and two, should take up the offer of.
Great, Maya. Absolutely comprehensive. Trish, I'm not sure, is there anything more that you can cover? From Abby's point of view, again, how is your involvement and engagement with the CIH standards helping you sort of prepare for what's coming with C&C in the I was going to say coming months and years?
So that was a really great summary that Michael gave there. So just to kind of pick out a couple of bits, really. I guess when the regulator comes knocking at each of our housing associations, it's thinking about, they'll be asking things like, has there been enough investment? How can we see that teams are growing and learning? And I would say that competence isn't dormant. It's something that's living, and Bjorn's talked about the kind of challenges and the complexity, and we grow through those challenges as housing professionals, and we face into that change and we reflect. So I think that's a really important thing for housing providers to think about, and how colleagues are supported through that. And that's really where the professional standards can help colleagues to reflect on the challenges that they've been through. They also encourage both technical capability and values-led behaviour as well. Bjorn's talked earlier about culture, and that values-led behaviour is so important, and it's really critical for meeting the new regulatory expectations as well. And completing the self-assessment can also be part of demonstrating how colleagues are continually reflecting and improving their competence, which again, going back to the regulator, it's going to be a really core part of what they're looking for, because it's not just about qualifications. And something we've been doing at ABRI is our housing professional of the future. And this is where colleagues are able to come along and to learn and hear about things that are going on in the sector. Also, some of those key tools that people might touch on. We hear a lot of the time that people using the word, I work in finance, I work in IT, but actually we're all housing professionals and we all need to understand what each other does. And that's what Housing Professional of the Future does at ABRI. And we're really proud of the work that we're making with that. And I just wanted to add as well that, Michael, you talked a little bit about that low willingness and appetite for qualifications. Well, I was somebody that chose to join the sector when I was 21, and I have recently, in the last few weeks, just finished my last assignment for my level 5 qualification.
Oh.
And, probably like a lot of people that are listening to this call may have thought, I don't know what I'm going to learn from it or what I'm going to take away. And all I can say is it's one of the best qualifications that I've done. I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much more about the sector. And I've made lots of new connections as well through it. So I would really encourage those that are a bit unsure as to whether they want to do it or not, to really think about it, because it's done so much for me and my career already now in the last few weeks of finishing my assignment.
That's great, Trish, and congratulations on finishing it, we should all say. And I think it's a really good example of something that Michael said, and that these qualifications, it's not so much that, okay, I want to be a manager now, so I have to do the level 4, or I want to be a director now, so I want to do the level 5. It's recognizing that those qualifications are really valuable, sort of inherently good things to do in and of themselves. And, even if you've got no aspirations to ever be a director, doing the level 5 will give you that level of learning, and also that level of kind of peer connection, as you've talked about, Trish, that will really kind of develop your skills and help you to be a better professional. I think there was a couple of other things, Trish, that you touched on that I think are really worth reflecting on and that are really interesting. I think that idea of maybe skills being seen as dormant sometimes. I think we do sometimes have this perception that, okay, we've got a skill, we can tick it off now, we've done that, we can talk about it. But I always try to see these things myself, and when I do my own sort of self-reflective practice, as these things are always a process. So I've never just ticked off a particular skill. That skill is always evolving, and my understanding of that is always evolving. And then I think the second thing you said that was really interesting and that struck a chord with me, and that somebody who works quite a lot with CIH members who work in retrofit teams, assets teams, sustainability teams, sometimes those colleagues, they come into housing from perhaps surveying or from somewhere else, and they quickly just fall in love. They quickly just come in and say, wow, this is the place that I want to work. I never imagined myself working in housing for this long, but I joined, and here I am 10 years later, a director of assets and sustainability, or whatever I might be. So I think that's a really important point, that we're all working in housing. It doesn't matter where we've come from, but you come into it and you're part of that system and you're part of that culture. I've went on a little bit there. So Bjorn, I just want to come to you on this question, which I'm going to need to remind myself of now. It's how can the standards support, the CIH standards, I should say, support the Competence and Conduct Standard, and maybe a little bit about how you've been approaching this at ASTA.
And again, my congratulations to you as well, Trish. I mean, I have to say, I think it's that type of thing, if I may, is a wonderful jumping off point for promoting our profession and working in housing generally. And I think it builds too on your points, really, Matthew. I just want to pick up on something that really, I think is really important you've said, that actually I think we've got a responsibility to train and support and educate people in advance of them doing things. One of the major problems I think we have in British industry and British service sector generally, for example, which isn't CIH linked at all, is that we tend to promote people to managers, but we never train them to become them. We don't invest in their leadership before they become leaders, and then we wonder why they may be professionally brilliant, but perhaps not such good leaders. So we need to think differently, to learn from that, and actually to encourage a cohort of people to become housing professionals who, as you rightly say, may have no wish or desire to go up the greasy pole of being promoted with an organisation, but just want to be brilliant at what they do. And that is terrific. So I think there's something also about us not seeing the competence and conduct standard as a threat. And I have heard people describe it almost as that, oh, here we go again, another regulatory burden, another demand on the sector, more money attached to it. Actually, it's a brilliant opportunity to set out our store as a profession, to set out our store as organisations that do something truly special. I believe I'm blessed to have had the long career in housing that I've had, and I love every minute of it. It's challenging, it's hard, but it's also great and hugely rewarding. We need to tell that tale to a new group of people coming in. And I think actually things like our professional standards, things like our ethical decision making, things like our qualifications at the CIH are part and parcel of that. What we really want, and we all know, and Trish, you seem to be one of those very rare exceptions that made a positive choice to join the sector, get a group of housing professionals together and they'll all tell their stories about how they fell into housing. And it'd be very rare that you're lucky enough to meet this kind of unicorn type rare figure, this unique creature that made an early decision that they wanted to get into housing. Why? We've got such an amazing profession and such an amazing job. People ought to be queuing around the corner to join our organisations. So Matthew, I'm just going to leave it on that point because I think everything that we've spoken about in this has really been, to my mind, leading to the real promotion of us as a profession. And wouldn't that be brilliant? Wouldn't that be brilliant if my grandchildren in a few years' time are saying, do you know what? I really want to do what Granddad did and I want to go into this profession from the start. I'll leave it there. But I think it's a unique and wonderful opportunity for us.
Absolutely. And I think it would be remiss of me not to mention at this point that the presidential campaign that we've had for CIH this year has been exactly that, Choose Housing, spearheaded by Ellie Holt. And it's had a real take-up across the whole of the sector, but also we've been doing work in schools, we've been going along to college events, we've been doing all of this activity sort of linked to that campaign to try and promote exactly that message. Choose housing. Don't just fall into it in 20 years' time because you'll miss 20 years of brilliance. Choose it actively now, get involved in it now. And the sky is the limit in terms of not just where you can go in terms of your career, but what you can achieve and again, what you can do yourself. I just want to ask one final question before we wrap up, and it's just potentially more of a quick one. So just for listeners and organisations that are listening to this conversation, potentially, hopefully inspired by it, looking to improve their professionalism and in an organisational way, being a good place to meet C&C when it comes in, what are maybe the one or two kind of critical bits of advice that you'd give them? What are the one or two kind of critical things that you think people should be doing now to get across this? So Michael, can I come to you first? A couple of quick thoughts.
Yeah, I think I would go back to the integration into the formality, if you like, of the organisation side of it. Hopefully we can rely a lot on individual people working in housing wanting to take up what are in these standards as well. But I think a big part of the success of all of this is already being demonstrated and will do in the future if actually housing providers themselves make it a part of how we do things. And something I was talking about earlier on, that it's part of appraisal systems, it's part of training and so on and so forth. So that would be my one nomination for that as well. Could I just reflect back on something Bjorn said about that expression that comes up a lot about falling into housing, because there is a connection here with the professional standards on the advocacy standard. I mean, part of that, well, there's two aspects to that. One is that people think housing is a good thing. These people that work in housing are a good bunch, very professional, because they do the right things in the right way. They're very professional. That's one thing. But of course, another part of the advocacy standard is about shouting about it. And as Bjorn demonstrated extremely well a couple of minutes ago, if people are following the advocacy standard, then we're out there shouting and saying, have you considered this? This is a great field to work in. Sorry, that's gone slightly off what your specific question was, but I couldn't resist it. Couldn't resist joining in with that.
No, not at all. A really important point about that part of the advocacy standard, in terms of we've all got a duty, if you like, to be going out and telling everybody we love working in housing. It's really great. You should also come and do it. And I think, again, linking that to Choose Housing, but I know even beyond that campaign going years back, we've been trying to advocate for that. So a really good point to bring in, Michael. Trish, over to you. A couple of quick bits of advice for any listeners on what are the top things they should be doing right now to get across this.
Yeah, I think there's probably practical things, and I'm sure a lot of organisations already know who has the qualifications, who doesn't. They probably already have their professional development plans and templates and things like that already in place. But when we talk about it being more than just a qualification, maybe housing providers can start to look at the tools that are available to them. We've talked about the ethical standards, we've talked about the professional standards self-assessment tool. On CIH's website, if you go onto the professionalism section, there's a wealth of information there that can really help you. And I would say to really start to get under the grips of those and understanding what's available and bringing those into your organisation. And my kind of last bit of advice is just to ask. Don't be afraid to reach out to other colleagues in the sector. You've heard today some of the great things that are happening at different housing providers. Let's just talk to each other, share good practice, and hopefully that will help us all on this journey.
Thanks, Trish. And Bjorn, you get the last word.
Oh, thank you. Very difficult to follow those, though. I mean, I love the point, by the way, that Trish was making about us seeing this as a collective challenge. I would say that housing organisations, perhaps particularly housing associations, are pretty rubbish at working collaboratively and together on broader initiatives, and this is a really good opportunity to get together. This isn't actually something about competition, it's something that should unify us in wanting to vote something for the common good. So I think there's an awful lot in there, and I certainly agree with all that Michael was saying in terms of preparedness. I suppose my parting view, Matthew, would probably be, perhaps not surprisingly, us living and breathing it, being the exemplars that we ought to be, no matter what our role is. As housing professionals, ultimately we ought to be the people that others aspire to be. A difficult challenge, I think, probably, but a good one nonetheless. And if we do have that in the back of our mind when we're talking passionately about our jobs, when we're talking passionately about the CIH and passionately about the professional standards, we stand the chance of switching those people on to the wonderful work that we actually do and helping them themselves to be ever better at it, which ultimately is going to be better for our customers and our tenants, which is really what all this is about. Thank you.
Fantastic last word. Well, we've hit time for this podcast today. Thank you so much to Michael Guest, to Trish Harrington-Dicks, and to Bjorn Howard for absolutely fantastic contributions this morning. I'm feeling inspired as a podcast host, and we are recording this at 8 o'clock in the morning, so I need to speak to you three every morning for the foreseeable future to get myself going for the day. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening in. You can tune into the next podcast on CIH's website or the YouTube channel, and I hope whatever time that you're listening to this, you have a good rest of the day and week. Thank you and take care.